Going live. Hey, Debbie. So, so just to introduce you to everybody, I am here today with my good friend and fellow coach and creator of the Quiet Network, which I want to talk about in a bit because it feels very important in relation to the topic that we're going to be covering today. So this is Debbie Pugh, and Debbie and I have known each other since our boys were 4 years old, and we met at the school playground and stood next to each other and both noticed that neither of us knew any other parents in the playground. And I think you came up to me and said, "You don't know anyone either, do you?"
Yes, and I think I mentioned that we were the only ones wearing suits or something, so we were off on our way to the office.
That was it. We were, we really felt like we were the only working mums. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah.
And so that also gives a little bit of a insight into our background as well, our shared background. And I believe I said to you, "I don't know anybody, and to be honest, I can't really be bothered."
Something like that.
And then obviously we ended up becoming really great friends and have known each other all this time. And that thing about how our path has traveled alongside each other's, I think, is really one of the things I really love about our friendship, actually, is just how so inadvertently we've ended up sort of doing very similar things. So you obviously also spent many years working in a very male-dominated industry like me.
Yeah.
And now you're a professionally trained coach and supporting others in making their own changes. And I asked you today, just to give a bit of background to everyone listening as well, I asked you today, as I said just before we press record, because my head is so full at the moment around the move that we're making and these massive, like, personal changes that we're going through as a family unit. And something that you and I have been talking about for a while is confidence and self-confidence. And I just suddenly thought last night, I just need Debbie. I just need to have a chat with Debbie and we can talk about confidence. And I'm sure there's going to be a load of stuff around what I'm feeling right now, which is going to resonate. So thank you so much for doing this and sharing your experience.
You're welcome. Looking forward to it.
So when I thought, like, a really good place to start would be just to have a kind of chat about what self-confidence is and what it isn't.
Yes.
So
yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And actually thinking about that was really interesting to think about what it isn't first of all, and my own kind of feelings around confidence. The first thing that came into my mind was, well, it isn't arrogance and it isn't noise. And then I was thinking, well, does that then mean that everything that's the opposite to that is confidence? And kind of the more I explored that, the more for me confidence is just that inner place of peace, that you just trust yourself, that you know you've got your own back, that you have that calm, you know you're going to be okay. Just acceptance. That's for me what confidence is: acceptance, self-acceptance, and trust, self-trust.
Yeah, so those, I think that those, so there was another word that stood out for me there as well, which was calm. And so I think with a state of inner confidence, that calm, that inner calm feels much more accessible. But yeah, trust. And in fact, I did look up a definition as well of what trust is. A feeling of what confidence is, rather. A feeling of trust in one's abilities, qualities, and judgment is a dictionary definition. And yeah, that thing that it's not arrogance. And I think so often we can get really muddled with that. Or we can sort of see it as being cockiness or someone being a bit too big for their boots. And so I think often, particularly like as we're growing up, or in school or in the family unit, sometimes self-confidence can end up being squashed because it's labeled something else.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And the thing that strikes me about this overt confidence that we sometimes think we see in people, it reminds me of a conversation that you and I have had, Henny, about introvert versus extrovert, and for me, being an introvert, I've always equated confidence. You could only be confident if you were an extrovert because of that, at ease in an environment where there's a lot of people, and mistaking that for being confidence when actually it isn't at all. First of all, people who are extroverts are absolutely lacking in confidence sometimes, and people that are introverts aren't always sat there quivering in a corner, not wanting to, say boo to a goose. You just get drained by that type of environment. So, I've had to reset my thinking around confidence definitely over the years.
Yeah, that's such a good. Say that again, sorry.
But then you compare yourself to others and think, oh, if only I could be that loud person, then I would be confident.
So what impact did that have on you in the workplace?
In the workplace, it made me feel that I could never measure up to that, because I knew that, there's that thing, fake it to make it. I felt that I couldn't really emulate that type of behavior. First of all, being in a very male environment, there's a particular way very confident men behave. And so, I didn't have the kind of the working material to start with. But just that sort of sense of being almost invisible, and not having the ability to project what I was all about, because I felt like I didn't fit that mold. I couldn't ever see myself being a person that could stand up and present, or hold a room, or confidently do any of those things. So it did really hold me back.
And there's something there about you mentioned before about that self-confidence isn't about noise, and actually that there was a sort of sense then as you were talking that thing of being quiet or being sort of smaller, because a sense of like, well, I can't make enough noise that I'm going to be heard, or I can't be big enough that I'm going to be seen. And there it really reminds me of a company that I worked in many years ago, where one of the senior female directors was advised by a senior male colleague that for her to get on, she basically needed to be more like a bloke.
Right. Does that include growing a beard?
It includes absolutely growing a beard and wearing brogues. It was such an interesting response from him, and actually her response to it was exactly what you were just talking about. Well, I need to be louder, I need to be pushier, I need to be more kind of dominant, assertive, dominant, that kind of sense. And it was almost like all of her trust in herself was just wiped out, because suddenly it's like, well, I'm not good enough as I am, I need to be something different. And I think that again, that sort of comes back to this definition of what self-confidence is this trust in ourselves that we are enough and not too much.
Definitely.
So I think there's also something here around what is self-confidence, and that so it's not arrogance, but it is also highly correlated to self-esteem.
Very much so.
And I just wonder, I know I mentioned before about you've set up the Quiet Network, and for me, just kind of looking around the edges of what you're sort of doing with that, it feels like part part of what you're offering up is a way of building self-esteem or self-confidence within it. Do you want to just talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I do feel I owe a massive debt of gratitude to Susan Cain and her book Quiet, because that book absolutely changed the way that I saw myself in terms of my introversy, and it helped me be comfortable with the fact that I am an introvert. And what it's done for me is it has massively raised my self-esteem, because just through that one book, she is able to highlight all of the positive aspects of being an introvert. And so instead of me viewing them through the prism of everything I felt that I wasn't, I was able to see all of the things that I am and all of the qualities that being an introvert can bring. Because I'm sure we've all sat around a board table, well, perhaps not all of us, but people that have sat around a board table where there are a lot of loud people, you know, it can sometimes get quite difficult to get a point across or get some kind of agreement. So it's really important to have that balance. You need all sorts of people sat around a board table. I mean, you know, there's so much talk about diversity. It isn't just about male, female. It isn't just about race. Personality type is also really important in my view. And there's plenty of evidence that suggests if introverts were, you know, given their place, they're the kind of, you know, we're the ones that say, hey, have you thought, can you just slow down? Let's step back a second and look at, you know, analyze, look at the facts.
And not have knee-jerk responses to things, emotional responses to things.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that's why the Quiet Network is there. I mean, it's still, you know, very much in its infancy, it's very much evolving, but it's a place for introverts to go and talk to other, you know, introverts. And we don't all sit there not talking to each other because we're introverts. You know, it's just a safe space where your voice can be heard, in quiet, in peace, and just to be happy with being that way. It's actually been very powerful for me.
Yeah. And that point around the introvert extrovert thing, and like you said, we've talked about this quite a lot, and my reflection being that I think I always thought I was an extrovert, and I think I was always taught that I was an extrovert and treated as though I was an extrovert. So a kind of certain expectation that, like, oh, Henny will be the one who'll get up on the stage and ta-da, which is true in many respects. You know, that aspect of me is there. You know, I don't mind looking a fool or kind of having attention on me. Like, I don't mind it. But my reflection as I've got older is that I have got quieter. I mean, you know, so much quieter as my inner life has expanded exponentially. And I'm, you know, I am connected with my inner self. I feel like I've become more and more introverted, which, again, to your point, doesn't mean that I don't want to talk to people, because actually that's what I spend my whole life doing is talking with people. And it doesn't mean I don't want to communicate, because, again, you know, writing and doing things like the podcast is all about communication. But it just means that the way that I experience life and the world around me is quite different now to how it was. And I think that was something that took me quite by surprise, actually. It was through our conversations that I really recognized it. And I'm not sure if that's something that people really talk about, is the fact that it can shift as we change. That can shift too. It's not a fixed asset. Is that
yeah, it does make sense to me. And perhaps you were always an introvert all along, but actually, you know, you learned the behavior that you needed to use in order to navigate where you were at that particular time. I absolutely believe that, because I'm capable of behaving in a different way. I'm capable of, you know, being more extrovert if the situation requires it. Once upon a time I wouldn't have done that. I would never have been able to do it. but I think it's possible to demonstrate those qualities that maybe mask who you really are, because you just adapt all the time to your environment, don't you?
Survival strategies is coming up as a phrase. And actually, yeah, when I think about my upbringing, youngest of 4 kids, big house, we always had other people living with us or staying with us. There was always, it was rarely sort of less than 10 people sitting down to the evening meal. Is my memory. I'm not sure if that's actually accurate, but that's kind of how it felt. It was just like the house was always full and noisy. And actually, if you wanted to be heard, the way that you did it, well, what I learned was, you become a bit of a show off, and that's how you get the attention. And so it was either that or be really naughty, and I decided not to do that bit. So yeah, I think that's a really good point about how we adopt strategies. And I'm going to use that word again, survival strategies, because when we're in an environment, particularly if we think about a classic kind of office environment, and we see, well, this is the perceived way or the accepted way of how people get on, then I need to adopt those behaviors, and I'll get on, and I'll be noticed. But the damage that can do, I think, is huge, actually. And again, sort of reflecting on myself, I don't think it necessarily served me. I think I squashed my inner life for a long time. And I know you found yourself in the situation where it feels like almost every client that is sort of working with you, that there seems to be a sort of aspect of this kind of coming through.
Definitely.
So what are your observations around how people do adopt these strategies for survival, and what the impact that can be?
What I'm hearing from my clients a lot, especially I tend to work mainly with men, which is interesting because that was never what I was expecting to do when I became a coach. I thought I was going to be working with women all the time. And it's just really interesting that what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is these behaviours that are being copied when that we're seeing, or my clients are seeing certain behaviours, and in order to kind of be part of that group, they're copying those behaviours, and those behaviours aren't necessarily behaviours that are true to them and to that, to their values. And so you kind of get this tension then, that on the one hand, that they're behaving in a way that helps them fit in, but it's causing them unhappiness, or to really question what that it takes a lot of energy to pretend that you're something that you're not, of course. And so yeah, I've been surprised to hear that from quite a few clients.
And my reflection, I know when we talked about that before, is I think it's incredibly common, actually, that often we do adopt sort of different behaviors in order to fit in. And my question then is about what impact that has on our self-confidence. You said about we can end up adopting behaviors that feel out of alignment with our values. And so, what impact does that have on our sense of self-confidence?
Well, I think it creates huge amounts of confusion. And I think the reason that it does that is because who are you then trusting? What are you actually? If you're behaving in a way that's not natural to you, particularly if it's an extreme of behaviour that really doesn't come from within you, but you see that this is how you get on, and it just creates a lot of confusion. And then you then start to, my experience, from my own experience.
Just lost you there, Debbie. Just lost you there, darling. Just say that again.
So what I was saying was, is it can create confusion for you, and it feels almost like you start layering behaviours over behaviours over behaviours, until in the end you come so far from who you are and what you believe, that you have to do a bit of work to get back to that, if you are able to or willing to kind of strip that all back and be your authentic self. I mean, there's so much research that performance out of people if it's aligned with their values.
Lost you again. Lost you again, Debbie. So again, there's so much more research. So is there an issue with your internet?
It's just been off and on today. Let me just check with Josh, because he's in the house.
Okay.
So let me just check if he is using the internet.
So if you're watching on YouTube, this is the unedited version of the podcast. This is what really happens. We have to check with grown-up sons what they're up to. Yeah, it looks like.
And just give me a second. Can I just go off camera a second? And go
yeah, sure. Okay, I'll pause. Well, actually, I won't pause. I'll just carry on chatting. So I think an interesting question here, just while we're waiting for Debbie to come back, is a check-in, a personal check-in with ourselves. Oh, she's back.
He was on YouTube.
Oh.
How dare he?
So yeah, I was just saying in the gap there, just about having a personal check-in on some of those things that we can layer on top of ourselves that can mask how we really feel about something, or how we really authentically want to show up in the world. And you said something about there's research around this.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of research that shows, you know, if you in the workplace, especially if you want to get the best performance out of people, if you want people to be more productive and more effective in what they're doing, then being able to behave in a way that's, you know, autonomous and independent and be innovative and problem solving, all of those amazing things. If you're pretending to be something that you're not, or you feel that you have to conform in some way, it just doesn't help you with your confidence. You can't trust your own judgment if you're trying to copy somebody else's way of behaving or doing things.
God, I mean, just two thoughts coming up with that. One is not only in the workplace but also in wider society. Just thinking about, you know, as a young woman, or, you know, a teenager, young adult, being far more interested in what, you know, celebrities sort of were wearing, or what they were thinking, or how they were looking, or how they had their hair, or whatever the thing was, than in what actually suited me, and the unhappiness that produced, you know, and that is rife now. Of course, it hasn't lessened since the 80s by any means. And then the other thought that it provoked was around the stress, actually, that comes from holding on to an image, or a sort of facade of what we want to portray, the energy, to your point, that takes up, but also the stress that will be activating in our limbic system, you know, in our amygdala. And when that is activated, it's so much harder for us to think creatively, to be empathic, and to look at the facts. So in terms of organizations, it really doesn't serve them at all to have people being like, you know, there was a phrase we used to use, you know, about sort of cookie cutters. You know, the cookie cutter kind of employee is something that's so unuseful these days. I think your signal is still dropping out.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. I'm really, really sorry.
Well, we'll keep going, and if we need to re-record it, we will.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and you know, it's really interesting, because I was thinking about what causes what causes us to lose confidence, and just stress in general around that. And for me, what I've learned from my own experience, and just, you know, what I see with my clients, even, and talk, you know, following up from what you were just saying about when you were younger and you were, you know, trying to behave in a certain way to conform with this ideal of fashion, or whatever it was. It's just almost like you're then looking for external validation all of the time. If I behave in this way, then I am good, you know, then I am accepted, then I'm doing the right thing, rather than it coming from you behaving in a way that suits you. Don't even get me on the kind of socio-economic reasons for making us all conform and buy particular things and behave in particular ways. But it just doesn't serve us individually to be looking for that external validation all of the time.
So there's something there about the suppression of let's get a bit Marxist. There's the suppression of the masses, but also there's something about that the external validation, I think, is such an important point, because I think that is one of the killers of confidence. When all of our sense of worth, our self-esteem, comes from what somebody else thinks, or more than that, what we perceive someone else perceives of us, and how that thing is then ricochets back and forth as we make endless assumptions and judgments, and, you know, generally get things totally muddled and confused, because we can never know what somebody else is actually thinking unless they know themselves and tell us. But that thing of being able to have a sense of like internal validation. I remember I hired the amazing woman, this incredible woman. I was so flat out in doing a consulting job. Everything was absolutely bonkers. I desperately needed a really good pair of hands beside me to support me. And I got 3 CVs from the agency, and one of them just shone for me. And I rang the agency and I said, I'll hire her. And they said, you haven't actually met her. You need to have an interview. And I said, no, I don't. I'll hire her. When it said that she was available right now, she can start tomorrow. Just tell her she's got the job. I'm trusting my instincts. This is not necessarily like, you know, good advice, but anyway. And she arrived, and oh, Debbie, honestly, I just fell in love with her. Her name was Rose. She was the most awesome woman. And the very first thing she said to me was, you don't need to worry about me. I'm internally validated. And I said, wow, I don't even know what that means, but I like it. She said, I don't need your approval. I don't need your attention. I will know if I'm doing a good job. You know, you tell me if I'm not, but you don't need to, you know, keep like stroking me and making sure I'm okay. I'll tell you. Honestly, I could have wept. It was just amazing. She really lived up to that promise. I mean, she was incredible. And I think she was the first person I'd ever met who really knew herself with that depth of knowledge, and also understood how powerful that is. And she just had this incredible calmness to her. And definitely an introvert, I would say. I would guess an introvert, but deep, deep self-confidence and very high self-esteem without arrogance. Yeah, I might put Rose on a little pedestal beside me, actually.
Yeah, get Rose on. Let's have a chat.
Yeah, actually, it's a really good idea. I might track Rose down. And there's something here as well about how it can, self-confidence can disappear as well, I think, particularly when it is heavily externally validated. That feeling of when it drains from us.
Yes, and I have recently experienced this myself. Just, everything's fine. You wake up one day, suddenly it isn't. And that's really quite challenging, especially when, well, from my own experience, even trying and falling back into old habits of trying to intellectualize my way out of that lack of confidence, which is a habit that I have to fight regularly. Even saying to myself, well, there is no material change here in your life. Everything that was happening last week is happening this week, but it had just all evaporated. And so for me, all I did was I just reverted diligently to all of the practices that you've introduced me to over the years, and just kept going with journaling and meditating, walking, just being outside, and gradually, bit by bit, I came back to myself. And I could still have no idea why that suddenly happened to me, because, as I say, there was nothing obvious to me, but there would have been something. There would definitely have been something. In fact, talking about it now, I suspect it's linked to security, because for me that is a big issue. So, and as soon as I have a sense of security being in any way wobbly, and this is all created insecurity in my mind, none of it is real, will start to go a little bit leaky for me.
Say that again. You said it's all security, it's all created in your mind.
In my mind. And then as soon as that happens, that's when things start to get a bit wobbly for me. And things then I start to chip away at myself, and the doubts start to creep in,
and the self-sabotage.
Self-sabotage. Yes, all of those glorious thoughts that we have in our heads telling us how awful we are at everything we do.
That beautiful inner critic. There's a couple of things that come up for me there. I think one, I loved your use of the word diligently, and how actually that's sometimes we just have to do the practice. We need to do the work, because it's the work that gets us through. So the work being that deep self-care, noticing the negative self-talk, making time for ourselves to get out into nature, or to have a break, to have a breath of air, whatever it might be. And obviously all the things like meditation and journaling. What was the other thing? A little bit of a menopause moment here. That's so frustrating. It was such a lovely point I was going to make.
It's always, I'll just step in here while you're trying to remember your points. One of the things that I think that we do when we lose confidence, I'm really interested in language and the way that we frame things. And so what happens is we tend to have these like really we label ourselves in the wrong way. We use wrong labels. We use really dramatic, exaggerated language. Like, so you might do something, you might do a presentation and it goes a little bit wrong, and you'll go, oh, I'm a complete failure. I'm absolutely useless. If you were a complete failure, you wouldn't even be getting up in the morning. You wouldn't be getting your kids ready for school. You wouldn't be going to work. You wouldn't be holding down your job, holding down a relationship or any of the other things you do. You're not a complete failure. You had a bad day, or maybe you had a bad hour.
Or a bad moment.
A bad moment, which is like 0.00000% of whatever, your whole life is. And suddenly everything is over, you catastrophize everything. So I think reframing language is actually really important, and sort of saying to yourself, oh, that presentation didn't go very well. What can I take from that? What could I do next time that would mean I'm better prepared? Or if my laptop blows up, I did remember to bring hard copies, or just something that you can take that prepares you better for next time.
That's brought back the thought that I lost. Yay! Which is, so it's your point around learning, like, what can I learn from this moment? What can I bring from this moment? What is this moment here to teach me? And in exactly the same way, you described how recently your self-confidence kind of did a bit of a plummet, and not knowing kind of what caused it, or even what meant that everything then shifted again and you're, sort of back up, feeling really confident again. It's sometimes it can be really useful just to sort of turn toward that moment and think, okay, so what is that teaching me? So what did that experience teach you, Debbie?
It taught me that I had slipped in my practice, actually. It taught me that I'd been ignoring a part of myself that does need quite a lot of looking after. You and I have talked at length about the different aspects of our personalities, and we give them names, we talk about them, and I have my child, my little Debbie, whatever I want to call her, but she is the most needy kind of part of me, and if I don't give her my adult, this is going to be okay, it's all right, I am in control, I do know what I'm doing, then she gets quite loud, and she is the one that affects my confidence. I do have other aspects of me that aren't as needy. They create certain behaviours in me, but she is the one that is the really needy one. And I just had fallen out of the habit of journaling, which is the thing that connects me to that aspect of myself, but very, very directly. And yeah, so serves me right for not practicing what I preach, is what I say.
Wow. So what a beautiful learning. What a beautiful, genuinely, what a gorgeous observation to come out of it. And actually, I know that when people suffer from low self-esteem, from a kind of psychotherapeutic perspective, it is often seen, not always, but is often seen that low self-esteem can have its roots back in our childhood, because we weren't maybe nurtured in the way that we needed, which isn't, again, a sort of judgment necessarily even on the people who were caring for us, but just for what we needed as an individual in that time. We perhaps didn't receive what we needed. And so that child self, learns that little pattern, and then it gets carried inside us as we grow. And I know you've talked about security being, one of the really important foundations for your well-being. And we've talked before about how safety is one of mine, and they're slightly different, but akin. And I know it's when my self-confidence drops, it's because my little girl she's really, really worried about something. There's something going on. She doesn't know what the answer is. And this is also where I just want to kind of loop back to something that you said before about like your kind of natural mechanism is to use logic. And actually, we're not talking about anything that is associated with logic, because self-confidence is an energy. It's about motivation. It's about that kind of driving energetic force inside us. And trying to apply logic to that is like trying to, I don't know, pick up water with a sieve. It's never going to work, because the two things are so incompatible.
Agree, totally agree with you. And it's actually really interesting, because your mind, my mind is, as you know, likes to be in control and be very, emotions that they're, pop those to one side. Let's just focus on the logic here. And what I've noticed through meditation is I've really noticed how my mind acts and how it doesn't want to be quiet. It just observing it. When I first started meditating, I couldn't control it. I couldn't observe it. I couldn't engage in the process at all. And I kept thinking, I can't do this. I can't. It's just, and kept trying. And now I just watch it, and I notice it, and I notice when it's, acting up and kind of, not a relaxed mind. It's supposed to be a tool to help me, not to drive me crazy, which it can do sometimes, but meditating helps.
Yeah. And so we're back to that word around sort of the correlation between calm and confidence, I think. And there's I wonder as well that there's something else here, again, sort of looping back to something at the beginning around how we perceive people who we perceive to be self-confident, and how we can label them as arrogant, maybe on the one hand, but on the other hand, how we really revere them. You know, they're like the superstars, you know, at work or you know, or stage, film, drama, you know, song.
Yeah, the cult of personality. That's, you know, there is a real sense of, especially in the workplace, but not even for me, not even in the workplace, but when I'm around people that behave in a certain way, there's just something about them that I think, oh, I wish I could be like that. I wish I had that kind of, you know, confidence, or that wit, you know, that kind of, you know, people who are like really fast, always cracking jokes, or always got a comeback really, really quickly. And I'm just always, wow, amazed about those type of people. But those type of people, in my experience, are not necessarily, you know, inside totally satisfied with themselves. They are also experiencing challenges, and sometimes this kind of behavior, this, you know, jokes and being the life and soul of the party, is, again, it's not always as it seems. So
it can be a mask.
Yeah, we bring our kind of our judgments and our expectations around people like that. But sometimes it isn't. All is not as it seems.
Yeah, so there's something there as well about not so the comparison being the thief of joy.
Yes.
Which I know we both love that concept, and you know, and often end up sort of talking with clients about it. But there's also something around not judging others, and so bringing compassion. So even when someone looks like they're behaving in the way that we wish that we could behave, and that can lead to jealousy. It can lead to being really irritated by them because there's a bit of our ego that's going like, actually secretly I'd like to be like that, so I'm gonna not like them because it's making me uncomfortable that they're great and I don't feel great, so I'll translate that into not liking them. That can be a, you know, a bit of a convoluted, tangled thought process going on in our heads. But actually coming into the place of compassion, whoever we encounter, however we perceive them, and also shining that compassion on ourselves, feels like that is really fundamental to self-confidence as well. And actually, that's reminded me, I came across completely by chance, where did I put it? I came across a really lovely piece by Kristin Neff, actually, which I now can't find. I'll put it in the show notes, which was, so Kristin Neff is the queen of self-compassion. But what she was talking about was how true self-compassion is when we trust ourselves enough to really love ourselves. And when we show others true compassion, we're basically saying to them, you can trust me. Even when it's someone who might be behaving in a way that we don't want to condone, we can still express compassion toward them. And I think, you know, that sort of correlation between that word trust and confidence, and trust and compassion feels quite strong, actually, which I hadn't really, don't think I'd really sort of thought about until I came across that quote from her.
It's funny because I had actually, when I was thinking about today, I had actually written compassion, self-compassion equals confidence. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah. And that quietness, so coming back to your, you know, the quiet network, actually that quietness, the inner quiet, but also there's something incredibly powerful when you are sitting, you know, around a noisy dinner table or a noisy boardroom table, or, you know, a noisy playroom, you know, wherever it might be. And someone speaks with that quiet authority, that quiet confidence. And people like lean forward to listen rather than them, you know, feeling like they need to fill their chest with their voice and bellow it out. And so, and often, not always, of course, because there's no generalities, but, you know, often that can be someone who actually is, you know, sort of quietly confident about their opinion and not needing to force what they need to say or make other people think the way that they do.
Yeah.
There's something about transactional, easy for you to say. There's something about transactional analysis here. You know, the plus minus, and that mental sort of that mindset that we can adopt. So just to explain to everyone listening, so it's this idea that, so if Debbie and I show up to the podcast today, with us both thinking, so for me, if I think I'm okay, Debbie's okay, and Debbie turns up thinking I'm okay and Henny's okay, then we've both got this plus mindset, which means that we're creating the most conducive environment for us to have a warm and valuable conversation. If I turned up thinking I'm not okay and Debbie's okay, then our power dynamic would be different. I wouldn't feel as though the things I had to say were going to be worth listening to. I'd be feeling less confident. I'd perhaps be sort of sitting back a bit as opposed to being really engaged. And if Debbie and I both turned up saying I'm not okay and she's not okay, then we may not have lasted this long on the podcast. But what's really interesting about transactional analysis is that before we go into any kind of interaction with someone, we can choose to adopt, you know, we can sort of just say to ourselves, I'm okay. I'm okay. It doesn't mean I need to be different. I don't need to be anybody else. I don't need to be like anybody else. I'm okay. I'm internally validated. And then to extend that compassion to the other person, and they're okay. And that mindset just has, I think, the most transformative effect on interactions between people. Really does.
Really agree. Definitely. So it changes the energy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it totally, and even just talking about it kind of changes the energy now, just being like consciously aware of what we're bringing into any situation, but it's more about what we're bringing into ourselves. Like, what is the feeling that we're looking to create within ourselves? And to just have that really simple mantra, I'm okay. You know, maybe that's it.
Is it that simple?
You know, maybe it is.
Maybe it is that simple.
Is that it? Have we just answered what is self-confidence?
Yeah.
Oh, philosophers have been working on this for, you know,
Centuries.
centuries. I wondered if there was anything else that you felt was really useful here for people to be mindful of, or
Henny, can you repeat that again? My internet, I lost you there for a second.
okay. I was just going to say, I wonder if they're just, as we come to the close of this conversation, whether there was anything else that you felt was really useful for people to reflect on.
Well, there is actually something, and it's quite cheesy, but you know me, I do like a bit of cheese. So I was going to ask you if you would mind if I just read out a little quote from a favourite film, which is Planes, Trains and Automobiles. Now, you didn't expect me to say that, did you?
Did not. I thought you were going to say When Harry Met Sally.
No. So this is the scene where Steve Martin and John Candy are in the hotel room together. And John Candy is driving Steve Martin, around the bend with all of his various habits and everything. And he's been quite unkind to him. And John Candy says, "You think what you want about me. I'm not changing. I like me. My wife likes me. My customers like me because I'm the real article. What you see is what you get." And I just thought, wow, John Candy, or whoever wrote that script, to me, that is the essence of confidence, believing in yourself, being true to yourself, and being liked for being yourself. Love that.
I love that too, because I remember the scene in the film, and the way that he delivers it is with a calmness. It's not there's no aggression within it. There's no sort of desperate desire to assert, you must believe what I'm saying, because actually he knew it so deeply in himself that he didn't even need Steve Martin to believe that he knew it.
Exactly.
I love that. Well, that is a first on the podcast. Oh, that's been so great. I am so grateful to you, Debbie. And I'm going to share the details for the Quiet Network for anyone who would like to come and just be part of it. And I know, like you said, it's a small group at the moment, but I think it's such a gorgeous idea to create a space. Particularly, I mean, there's something, the paradox of creating a space like that somewhere like Facebook, which is all about noise so often, and opinions, and who can write the loudest, whereas actually it's just a little quiet space. I feel a bit like that about the Positive Network. Not the Positive Network. What's that? Something I haven't even created. The Positive Menopause, in that it's not a noisy space. It's quite a quiet space. I hadn't really thought about that actually until just that moment. But I think that's what brings value so often, because there's so much noise and distraction in our lives, that having somewhere where we can just be quietly ourselves feels really valuable.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, my darling.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, and you. All right. Bye.
Bye.
So, yet another wonderful explorative conversation. And Debbie said something just before she left, which was her deep understanding of how it is when we really lack self-confidence, and the fear that can arise when we're put into situations where we perceive others behaving in a confident way, but all that we're feeling inside ourselves is, that kind of it's almost like our blood turns to water, and we can find ourselves almost in a state of panic, or in a state of panic, because things feel so challenging. And I hope that some of the things that we've discussed today help go toward sort of showing things that we can put into place to support us in building a bit more confidence. And there are a handful of things that I just wanted to touch on that can be really beneficial here if low self-confidence is something that you've noticed in yourself. So positive psychology is really, really important. Challenging our own kind of negative thoughts about ourselves by finding things to celebrate. And there was an amazing quote that I came across, which I couldn't find who it was attributed to, but the quote is, "Imagine if we obsessed about the things we love about ourselves." And I just thought, gosh, what a gorgeous mind flip. So rather than just focusing on the stuff that we have learned somewhere down the line is not good enough or is too much, that we obsess about the things that we love about ourselves instead. And as Debbie pointed out, self-care, eating well, exercise, positive self-talk, mindfulness, journaling, all of these deep self-care practices, with the stuff that we like to call the work with a capital W, they are absolutely intrinsic to how we can build and rebuild our self-confidence when we find that it is wobbling. And that definitely is true for me too. I think there's also something here about being realistic about what we want to achieve. So striving and pushing at stuff that feel insurmountable can really knock our confidence, particularly if we almost sabotage ourselves by taking on tasks or challenges which we don't yet have the resources or the knowledge or the skills to achieve. And that can be, it's almost like, so that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course I can't do it because I'm not good enough. And again, obviously that is a sign of low self-esteem or low self-confidence. And the phrase here, which isn't a very nice one, but it often resonates with people, is, eating the elephant in several bites, not trying to eat it all at once, not trying to, to get everything done all at once, but going at stuff gently, bringing compassion. And then something else, which might be a bit surprising, actually, which is shown to really help with self-confidence, is helping others. And what it does is it promotes a rush of endorphins in the brain, which are brought about by positive physiological changes in our body. And one piece of research that I came across showed that older individuals who volunteered for at least 200 hours in a year decreased their risk of hypertension by a massive 40%. So I think research like that is really interesting. Now, obviously, I expect there will be lots of research that provide lots of other reasons why that hypertension risk might have been decreased. So just being outside, being connected with others. But I think it's just interesting that that there is research that shows that volunteering, helping others, actually has this very positive impact on our own system and potentially on our own self-confidence as well. And another one is around a willingness to learn new things. So particularly when everyone else is in a learning environment, it can help us remember that everything is an experiment. And that's definitely one of my mantras, which I learned from a colleague a few years ago and has stayed with me. When I feel wobbly and I'm unsure about what to do about something, or I'm unsure if I have the skills, the knowledge, the know-how, the capability, the capacity, whatever the word is, I remind myself everything's an experiment, and I just go with it. And it really helps. So if you give it a go and you find that it helps you as well, I'd love to hear from you. And Debbie touched on this one right at the very beginning of our conversation, which is about accepting ourselves. So recognize that everyone, even those who appear to be endlessly brimming with confidence, can have things that sometimes make them feel small. And just accept who we are rather than looking at how everybody else is or how we perceive everybody else is. And there is a gorgeous quote from Rumi, which I'd like to leave you with, which is, "Don't be satisfied with stories, how things have gone with others. Unfold your own myth." So once again, thank you for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with Debbie. And as I said, I'll share the link for the Quiet Network in case that has resonated with you. And I look forward to being with you again next week. And just as a little reminder that The Heart of Change, my second book, was published this week. And I've been doing a whole series of lives on Instagram, and I'm having some wonderful conversations about all the different facets of change that I discuss in the book with other practitioners. And if you'd like to explore those, have a look at my Instagram account. But also, if you'd like to get your hands on a copy of The Heart of Change, then go to shookbop.com, and that's SHOOKBOP.com, and there'll also be a link in the notes as well. And go safely. I send you a hug and a wave.